This is the Griffin Realty Group Ask-A-Griffin podcast, episode number 42, Touring. How can you use the law of comparative decision-making to simplify your home search? Are you a home buyer or a home seller who has questions about selling or buying residential property, but you can't find an easy way to get your answers? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Griffin Realty Group and the host of the Ask-A-Griffin podcast. Now, to help you take immediate action, to get started in the right direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the very near future, you can take advantage of our free step-by-step guides waiting for you at griffincourses.com. All right, let's get started. We're continuing in our buyer series, and we're in touring, meaning physical and internet touring of properties. So the question on the table in this episode is, how can you use the law of comparative decision-making to simplify your home search? The first point here today is that we make decisions in a relative way by comparing alternatives. So when we talk about the law of comparison, that's the way that the brain works. We see one thing versus the next. Think about falling in love, right? There's one person we might fall in love with more so than the next. Same thing with property. So when you're looking at a property to purchase it, you're thinking about it in a comparative way. Think about this. If you were to just look at one property in its entirety, and you didn't compare it to anything else, you're left with a lot of questions. There's no benchmark. You could come up with an imaginary standard, but if you didn't have the reality of that moment, then it's tough to make a decision. You're lost, really. Think about it. For those of you that have moved from another area completely, in maybe state to state, country to country even, there are so many factors that go into this buying process that most of them you never realize were comparative. Should I move to this part of the new city or that part? I mean, really, downtown Boston, where we cover, you can walk one block and have a completely different feeling. So, for example, walking from Beacon Hill over to Back Bay, you go from a lot of brick-faced properties that really are very, very old. And not that Back Bay is much different as far as age is concerned, but all of a sudden it's a brownstone. It's a completely different feeling. And the small, cutesy little Charles Street shops versus the big metropolitan feeling of Newbury Street. I mean, these are examples of areas that we need to compare against each other. And we talked about this in the podcast series before, so that we talk about lifestyle comparison. What would it be like to walk out the door in the Back Bay and walk to those amenities versus walking out the door in Beacon Hill to see all those amenities, right? So the lifestyle is very different. So we make that comparison. But now let's get back to the actual physical property. Let's get beyond lifestyle. As I've said, it's very important to consider that. But now we're talking about these properties. And so we're understanding consciously. So the idea of helping you with all this information is to help you become conscious of the process that's happening. You want to be conscious that you are making a comparative decision. Now, I know I'm stating the obvious, and I know a lot of you out there are really smart and saying, okay, get to the point here of what's so great about this. I'm a huge fan of simplification. When your life is already complicated and you do something that's complicated for a living and you have to think deeply all the time, I don't want real estate to add and compound to that stress. I want it to be simple for you. I want you to understand that just consciously you can get through this process much quicker if you'll just consider some of the obvious. So you're going to be using and invoking the law of comparison. We do it in everything. You're going to become conscious that you're going to use it as a tool when you go to buy a piece of property. The next point here is a physical tour. We're in this series about touring properties. A physical tour allows you to quickly decide on the most important have-to-have features. Let's go back to touring the city of Boston, for example. If you were to walk into a condominium in Beacon Hill, and you were to feel that, wow, this is really nice. I mean, it's cutesy, but the windows are smaller than I would have thought they would have been. I'm more looking for that big parlor entry, and I'm looking for those floor-to-ceiling windows, and it seems to be more prolific in the Back Bay. I seem to be able to find more of those walk-ups there than I do in the small and more closed-in streets of Beacon Hill. See what I mean? That becomes a have-to-have feature, but you wouldn't know that if you weren't going in and physically touring these properties. So when you walk into a street, let's say Commonwealth Avenue, where there's a big green space in the middle of it, and so even if you're on the darker side of the street, just having these huge windows might be a have-to-have moment for you. And you say, this is what I'm looking for. Even though I can't seem to find something on the sunny side of the street in my price range, I still get plenty of light in this big spot here, and I can see the green space in the middle. This is a have-to-have. I loved being able to walk out the door in Beacon Hill and go to all the cutesy little shops. But for me, comparatively speaking, I've got to come home to a place that's light, bright, and airy. And of course, if I can get on the sunny side, I can have it all, then that's where I'm going. See, that's how we make a comparative decision. And I'm giving you a real example of the way people decide where to live in the city of Boston. Let's even go further. Some people might say, I love this, but I'm not really into this whole Bostonian charm thing. This stuff feels old to me. I want to walk into a beautiful brand new glass building that overlooks all of the green space. I can see the Charles River. Well, now all of a sudden we go over into another area in the financial district or around the common or the garden where we might see more modern buildings. And now I'm walking into a building that has more of a modern concierge desk out front, and it's quote unquote a full service building. There's parking beneath. I'm not fighting with a resident sticker over in Back Bay or Beacon Hill. I'm driving right into the building. I'm dropping my car off at the concierge. I'm going upstairs right up to my 17th floor apartment, and I have these beautiful expansive views. It doesn't matter to me that I can't walk out onto an immediate balcony or roof deck right there. It doesn't matter. I just want to be up high in a modern building. See? And by the way, all of those areas are around the Boston Common and the Public Garden. So you could literally take a short walk around those areas, deciding, if you were new to the city of Boston, what is a have-to-have feature for you of that property. So we just talked about a lot of those physical attributes. So only a physical tour is going to allow you to do that. And that brings up the third point here in this podcast today. While an internet tour is helpful, it's a helpful starting point, a true and thorough comparison may only be achieved through a live tour. So let's talk about this. Much ado about 360 tours, 360-degree tours, using a Matterport camera. It's amazing technology. A photographer goes in, takes all of these pictures, and you can physically, it seems, walk through it. But it's not physical. It's digital. It's not kinesthetic. It's not physical. You are not in there putting your feet on the stairs, going up to the apartments. You're not in the elevator. You are not walking through the front door and feeling the space and seeing it. See, physically, it's the ultimate experience. A lot of people will ask us, well, can you do an online listing presentation, or can we meet online? Sure. It's as close as we can get to kinesthetic, but there's nothing like meeting you face to face. And for the buy side, there's nothing like allowing us to take you for a physical tour of several properties so that we can teach you, look, here's the day you invoke this process of a comparison. And I want you, this is what I always say to my buyer clients, I want you to think out loud, please, especially what parts are negative to you. What parts do you not like? I need to hear that the most, because my job is to hear you say, I don't like these old buildings. I need to be in something younger. Well, then voila, we're going to go across the Boston Common and we're going to go look at some full service buildings. We're going to go look at the Ritz. We're going to go look at the W. And then we might even go over to the Millennium. See where I'm going? It's just very easy when we're physically there, because all of a sudden what seemed like it was very interesting, very charming to you online, and you fell in love with the romance of the marketing of the listing agency. Now all of a sudden you're there and it's a completely different feeling, right? So like I said, the internet is a wonderful tool, and an internet tour is a wonderful tool. But the idea is, if we don't get physically into these properties, then we're not going to be able to get that law of comparison really working for us. It's work, by the way. Buying a house is work. It's not something that you're just going to do whimsically. I know it's stressful. I understand that. But it is a big financial and physical commitment. It's a physical commitment. You're committing to saying, I'm going to live in this property. Now, again, I'm talking to primary purchases, but the same should be considered if you're an investor. Because this is the way people are going to choose location. Right? What's most important to them? Is living in a full service building more important to that person, or is living in the charm of Boston? And again, I could have used Cape Cod. Is it more important for somebody to be close to a beach, close to a highway for a commute? So the more rural we get, now commuting and privacy or lack thereof become those things like, look, I want to live in a community. I want to see my neighbors. Get me a cul-de-sac. Or no, I don't want to be. I want to be out in more of a rural setting. See, that's all the law of comparison. How are you going to do that online? There are so many factors. It's in Latin. One of the terminology in economics is ceteris paribus, right? That price is going to determine a lot of what I'm interested in. However, something that can shift beyond that are all the other factors that we're holding still while we just look at price. What is $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million buy me in one of these locations? What does the money buy me? Well, I'm going to look at that first in isolation, ceteris paribus, holding all other factors constant. But the minute I open those all up, what happens? All of a sudden, I better get out there and get physical to consider all these factors and how they make me feel. Now, one little caveat there before I summarize. It can get overwhelming. When you consider all of these factors, it can get overwhelming. My best advice is to go with your intuition and how you feel. That matters. Think about it. Every day that you wake up living a lifestyle in a property, it's how you feel about it. Physically, like I said, there are going to be some have-to-haves. Don't compromise on it compromise on as few of those have-to-have features as possible. That will make you feel like you made a strong and smart, informed decision. But it's more so how you feel about living there. Would you feel safe? Is that important to you? Would it feel convenient? Would it feel social? All of those feelings that are important to you. It's not just the have physical attributes that you're using this law of comparison, but compare how you felt visiting one of these properties versus the next. All right, let's summarize this. We'll go back to these bullet points. We're in the section for buying a property, and we're in the section for touring. Touring physically versus, in this case, we'll talk about a little bit, digitally. The question on the table is, how can you use the law of comparative decision-making to simplify your home search? And the points were, well, number one, recognize that we make decisions in a relative way by comparing alternatives, the law of comparison, right? Two, a physical tour allows you to quickly decide. We're simplifying, to quickly decide on the most important have-to-have features. In other words, I must have big windows. I must have a big open kitchen. Those are have-to-have features. And third, number three, while the internet tour, okay, so the internet tour, touring a property, looking at its pictures, its digital footprint, even a 3D tour, is a helpful starting point. A true and thorough comparison may only be achieved through a live tour. So get out there and see these properties. Let me summarize it this way. Although the internet allows a home buyer to research properties, a digital representation pales in comparison to physically touring several properties at a time so that you can invoke the power of the law of comparative decision-making. All right, now remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the very near future by getting our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you at griffincourses.com. That's GRIFFIN courses.com. Also, don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen so that you don't miss out on any insights each time we upload an episode. We also post all of our episodes on our social media channels, so remember to turn on your notifications for Griffin Realty Group, and you won't miss the reminders. We'd also appreciate it if you would share our content with other people just like you so that they get the help that they need. Remember, we appreciate that you're listening, but we want to remind you, nobody's coming for you. So you want to get to work on a smart plan for buying or selling your next property, and we'll be here in the next episode to help you move in the right direction. Thanks again.